What if the delay wasn't just a mechanical hiccup, but a message woven into the gears and circuits? A warning that the battle she fought in boardrooms and courts had followed her onto the tarmac. Nova stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal's harsh fluorescence, the whispers and murmurs of displaced travelers washing over her like static. The gate area was a sea of bodies and rolling suitcases, tension crackling in the air, faces lit by phones as people scrambled to salvage schedules thrown into disarray. The scent here was different from the cabin's recycled air, overlaid with the aroma of pretzels and coffee, the distant tang of a disinfectant that couldn't quite mask the smell of thousands of breaths. The broad windows facing the runway reflected a gray, cloud-blanketed sky. Rain speckled the glass in sporadic bursts, as if someone had shaken a sieve of water above them. Nova maneuvered through clusters of passengers gathered around the gate desk, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She could feel the residual adrenaline in her muscles, a low buzz that made her fingers itch. Her phone vibrated the moment she switched off airplane mode. Notifications flooded the screen. Emails from the conference organizers, text from her assistant, and a message from her mother filled with prayer hands and flight safety emojis sent hours earlier that she hadn't received until now. She pressed her back against an unused pillar, away from the crush, and brought the phone to her ear. The mechanical voice of the voicemail system sang through one message after another until she reached the one she wanted, the calm, efficient voice of Simone, her chief of staff. "Hey, Nova," Simone said, the faint hum of an office in the background. "I saw the flight status update. They're saying mechanical issues at JFK. Let me know if you need anything. The GTS organizers are already asking about backup plans. Also, don't forget to call with the Legos team at 4 p.m. Eastern. Text me your ETA once you have it." Nova's thumb hovered over the call button. She hesitated, then opted for a message instead. She typed swiftly, her thumbs dancing over the glass. "Flight grounded due to mechanical issue. No departure time yet. Possible rebooking. Hold on, communications with GTS until further notice." She hit send, then squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. The momentum she'd built up leading to this trip had come to a jarring halt, like a bullet hitting bulletproof glass. Impact, cracks, but no breakthrough. She inhaled through her nose, exhaled through pursed lips, and opened her eyes. Gerald stood a few feet away, back turned to her, speaking loudly into his phone. His voice carried across the terminal like a clarion, his irritation palpable. "No, I'm at JFK. They grounded us over some." His hand went up, gesturing vaguely towards the tarmac, as if the problem were a misbehaving dog, a young woman with pastel purple hair and a nose ring brushed past Nova, muttering into her own phone. "And then this guy in first class was arguing about his seat like he owns the plane. Ugh, entitled much?" She glanced at Nova, eyes widening briefly in recognition, then looked away, embarrassed. Nova's pulse quickened as she realized she had been recognized. It was inevitable. Her face had graced magazine covers and billboards in certain circles, a symbol of black excellence in tech. Being seen could be empowering, but today she wanted invisibility. She pulled her scarf a bit higher, the silk whispering against her neck, and looked for a quieter corner. Her gaze fell on a cluster of beige chairs across from a glass-walled coffee shop. A group of travelers had set up camp there, headphones on, faces in laptops. A young boy lay on his stomach on the carpeted floor, coloring in a book while humming softly. Nova walked over and sank into a corner seat, placing her bag on the floor. She took out her notebook again, tapping the cover absent-mindedly with her fingers. The page from the plane still bore her neat handwriting. She stared at it, the words a mirror to her thoughts. Visibility is power, but also vulnerability. How to protect one without losing the other? Her phone buzzed. A message popped up from an unknown number. "Delay inconvenient, G." She looked up instinctively and saw Gerald glance at her over his shoulder, a corner of his mouth twitching. He had texted her. Somehow he had gotten her number. Likely from the airline manifest, she realized. A surge of irritation flickered, then settled into a wary curiosity. She typed back, "Your persistence matches your seat choice." He read it, his lips pulling into a thin line that might have been a smile. He pocketed his phone and, after a moment's hesitation, approached. His gait was less smooth than before. The earlier confidence had been tempered by the shared vulnerability of mechanical failure. When he reached her, he shifted his weight awkwardly. "Look, he began, then stopped. For a man who had no trouble asserting himself earlier, he now seemed to search for words. "About earlier! That wasn't my best moment. I'm not used to being challenged." I gathered, Nova said, her tone even. She closed her notebook and laid it beside her. She watched his shoulders rise and fall, the wrinkle in his forehead deepening. He sank into the chair opposite hers, his knees aligned with hers in an unintentional intimacy enforced by airport furniture. My wife always says I come across entitled, he continued.
She always says
He coughed, clearing his throat. I told her about our little... He made a vague gesture with his hand, encompassing the earlier conflict. And she agreed with you, actually. Said I should be grateful someone put me in my place before I made a bigger fool of myself in Tokyo.
She said yes, she did.
Nova raised an eyebrow. Are you going to Tokyo for business? She asked, surprised by the curiosity that slipped out.
What are you doing here?
Part of her wanted to deny him anything further.
What are you
Another
doing
part
here?
recognized the value in dismantling assumptions. He nodded. International finance, meeting with the consortium. Maybe we'll cross paths at that fancy summit you're keynoting.
I'm very proud
He
of
looked
what
at
we've
her,
built,
something like
and your
admiration
keynote
flashing.
was truly
My daughter is a big
exceptional.
fan of yours. She's 15, into coding. She told me if I got your autograph, she'd talk to me again.
And she looks up to you so
His lips lifted fully this time, self-aware. The mental image of a teenage girl, coding in her bedroom, excited by seeing someone who looked like her at the pinnacle of an industry still dominated by men, eased some of Nova's residual tension. It reminded her of her own 15-year-old self hacking into her school's network to change the banner to Girls Code 2, earning detention and a lifetime of curiosity. What's her name? Nova asked softly. Emily, he said. Emily Rogers.
What's her name?
He reached into his briefcase, rummaged, then pulled out a small notepad and a pen. If it isn't too much. Nova took the pen. Its weight was surprising, heavier than it looked. She wrote on the paper, her script looping elegantly. To Emily, keep coding, keep questioning, make room where there is none. Nova Adeyemi. She dotted the I in her last name with a small star, a habit she had picked up in childhood. Gerald took the paper with a reverence that warmed her unexpectedly. Thank you, he said, folding it carefully and sliding it into his wallet. I also wanted to say, when I said what I said earlier about people being sensitive, I wasn't thinking. But my daughter's world, your world, isn't my lived experience. I need to do better. His eyes met hers, earnest and regretful. Nova felt a part of her relax. She nodded. Doing better is a choice you make every day, she said. We're all learning, she paused, then added, including me. He opened his mouth as if to ask something more, but a blaring announcement cut through the hum of conversation. Attention, passengers of Flight 837 to Tokyo. Due to unforeseen circumstances, your flight has been canceled. Please proceed to the service desk for rebooking and accommodations.
Flight has been canceled.
We apologize for the inconvenience. A collective groan filled the gate. The boy on the floor sat up, his crayon scattered. A woman in a navy suit muttered an expletive and snapped her laptop shut. The purple-haired girl rolled her eyes dramatically at her friend. Gerald looked at Nova and grimaced. Here we go, he murmured. Nova stood, hoisting her bag onto her shoulder. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Simone. GTS organizers offering remote keynote option. Want to accept or catch next flight? She swallowed, considering. Traveling now would mean risking more delays, more stress. A remote keynote would be safe, easy, comfortable. Her mind flashed to her father again, soldering bits of wire on the porch of their small home. He had looked up at her with magnified eyes, his glasses perched precariously on his nose. If your path feels easy, Nova, he had said, check whose road you're on. Great things are built on rough terrain.
Remember,
she typed
your
back,
choices
find
define
next available flight, we'll keynote in person. Tenacious as always, Simone replied with a digital wink. Nova joined the line forming at the service desk. It snaked along the wall, passengers huffing and shifting their weight from foot to foot. A toddler wailed somewhere behind her. The fluorescent lights cast a pallor on everyone's skin. She pulled her scarf tighter, comforted by the soft fabric. Behind the desk, 2 airline employees typed furiously, their expressions strained yet professional. We have a flight leaving in 6 hours, one said to a man in a business suit. We can get you on that, sir. We'll issue a meal voucher as well. 6 hours. Nova's stomach tightened. Time ticked like a metronome. She would land in Tokyo late evening if there were no further issues.
6-hour delay.
She could still rehearse
Here's
her
a meal
speech,
voucher.
adjust for the time difference. She shifted her weight, feeling the tug of her knee as it protested long standing. Excuse me, a voice to her left said. Nova turned and found herself looking at a woman with silver hair braided into cornrows,
Excuse me.
each strand gleaming. She wore a cobalt blue jumpsuit and carried a tote bag that read, Black women build bridges. Her dark brown eyes were warm and sharp, lines creasing at the corners. Aren't you Nova Adeyemi? The words were
Aren't
spoken
you
with a
Nova
smile, not a
Adeyemi?
demand. Nova nodded, surprised and humbled. I am, she said. And you? Celeste Morrison, the woman replied, shifting her tote to her other arm. Architect, my firm is working on sustainable housing in Harlem. I've followed your work since your first
Hello,
TED Talk.
my name
It's
is
an honor to
Celeste.
meet you in
I
person.
am an
She
architect
extended
and
her
I
hand.
specialize
Nova
in
shook it, the grip
sustainable
firm.
housing.
Likewise, she said. I've heard of the Morrison Collective. Your designs are beautiful. Celeste
I
chuckled.
deeply
You
admire the
flatter
work
me.
of the Morrison
When I saw you on the
Collective.
plane, I wanted to come
saw
say
Nova
hi,
on the
but then that
plane,
whole seat kerfuffle
but
happened.
I didn't
I
want to
figured you had
approach
enough on
her
your plate.
because of the whole
She
seat
tilted her head,
kerfuffle.
eyes searching Nova's face. How do you do it? Keep your cool when people
How do
try
you
you
keep
like
your
that.
cool under
Because,
such
girl,
pressure?
she shook her head, letting the sentence hang. Nova smiled wryly.
Practice.
Practice, she said. Then,
I
more
think of those
seriously,
who want
I
me to
remind
fail,
myself of the people who would
and
love
those
to
who
see me
need me to
fail,
succeed.
and those who need to see me succeed. And I have my moments, believe me. I go home and let it out. I just don't let them see me crack. Celeste nodded slowly. Strength and vulnerability. We need both.
Body's some bracket.
She glanced around, then lowered her voice.
I don't let people see me
Listen,
crack.
I overheard a flight attendant talking.
But you know what else
They
is
said the
really
plane
good?
had more than a mechanical issue. Something about a
overheard the
threat
flight
called
attendant.
in. She frowned, the lines on her forehead deepening.
There's a
Could be
threat.
nothing, but you might want to be
Be
careful.
careful, Nova.
Nova's pulse spiked. What kind of threat? She asked, her voice a whisper. She leaned closer. Celeste shrugged. Just overheard them whispering. You know how rumors start. But given who you are and the circles you're disrupting,
What kind of
she
threat?
trailed off, letting the implications settle between them. Maybe
About
it's
the
nothing.
circles you're
Still,
disrupting.
watch your back, Nova. You're too valuable to lose. The line shuffled forward. Nova swallowed, feeling a coldness bloom in her stomach. Had someone intentionally grounded the flight because of her? Was she paranoid? She flashed back to the email she received last month, a veiled warning. You won't always be protected behind your screens. She had dismissed it as troll bravado. Now, the words drifted like a fog across her mind. She forced herself to breathe evenly. She could not spiral in the middle of a crowded terminal. She needed more information. She needed to keep moving. Thank you, she told Celeste, her voice steadying. For the heads up and for the work you do. Building bridges is a literal and metaphorical art. Celeste grinned. You know it, she said. They exchanged numbers quickly, their fingers tapping screens. If you're ever in Harlem, come see the project. I will, Nova promised. When she reached the desk, the agent scanned her boarding pass, fingers dancing over the keyboard. We can put you on the 2 p.m. flight, they said. We'll give you a meal
you for
voucher
your
and a hotel
patience.
voucher in case of further delays. The flight is with a partner airline. Thank you, Nova replied, taking the new boarding pass. The gate number was in a different terminal. She took
Your
the
boarding
voucher,
pass,
noting the amount,
a
15.
hotel voucher,
She huffed a silent
and a meal
laugh.
voucher.
$15 barely covered a sandwich in this terminal. As she stepped away, Gerald caught her eye. He held up his own new ticket, his expression resigned. Guess what travel companions, he said. Seems so, she replied. Do you know anything about a threat called in? He blinked, his face tightening. Threat? What kind of threat? A flight attendant apparently mentioned it, she said,
Do you know
keeping her
anything
tone
about a threat
casual.
being called in?
It might be a rumor. His gaze shifted to the left, then back to her. I didn't hear anything.
I did not hear
But let's keep our
anything, I
ears open,
promise you.
he said, his brow furrowed. And our eyes. They fell into step together toward the shuttle that would ferry them to the next
Keep our ears
terminal.
open and our eyes.
It was a strange alliance, born of conflict, apology, and shared necessity. The shuttle smelled of exhaust and plastic seats, its doors sliding shut with a pneumatic hiss. Passengers clung to poles as it lurched forward, winding through tunnels beneath the airport. Nova's phone buzzed once more, this time with a notification from an encrypted messaging app she used only for sensitive communications. A single line of text appeared from an unknown contact. They will use your fight against you! Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. Her fingers trembled as she slid the phone back into her pocket. She stared through the scratched plexiglass window of the shuttle, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The hum of the engine blurred with the roar of her own blood rushing past her ears. Everything okay? Gerald asked, noticing her sudden stillness. She forced a nod, her face calm. Just a reminder, she said, to stay alert. Outside, the shuttle emerged into the light, racing past a runway where planes lifted into the sky, their wings slicing through low-hanging clouds. For a moment,
Yes, I am
Nova
fine.
envied the simplicity of their trajectory. Up, forward, away. Then she remembered the mechanics that had to align, the engines that could fail, the human beings behind each checklist. Nothing was ever simple. As they stepped off the shuttle and made their way to the new gate, Nova's mind raced. She thought of Celeste's warning, the encrypted message, the seat dispute, the mechanical failure. Separately, they could be coincidences. Together, they formed a pattern she could not ignore. Someone might be trying to intimidate her, to derail her, or to harm her. Simone texted again. Flights rebooked. 2 p.m.
Package is
departure.
encrypted.
Do you want a security detail? We can arrange.
You're in
Nova stared at
danger.
the question. She had always resisted the idea of bodyguards. She prided herself on moving through the world like anyone else. But she was not just anyone else. She was a symbol, a target, a change maker. She typed back, yes, discreet. Meet me at gate 42. She slid the phone into her pocket. Gerald walked beside her, oblivious to the storm gathering in her mind. She thought about telling him, about confiding the potential threat. But what would he do with that information? At this moment, she needed to protect herself. She would inform airport security, perhaps, after she gathered more details. She would reach out to her security consultant. She would not allow fear to dictate her choices, but neither would she ignore it. They arrived at gate 42. It was quieter than the previous gate, the chairs mostly empty. A woman in an airline uniform stood behind the desk, checking IDs. A janitor swept the floor, moving methodically. A cluster of teenagers lounged against the wall, earbuds in, thumbs tapping screens. Nova chose a seat that gave her a clear view of the boarding door and the concourse. She placed her bag on the chair beside her and splayed her fingers on her knees to stop them from fidgeting. Her eyes roamed the room, cataloging faces, noting exits. Gerald sat across from her, crossing one leg over the other, flipping through emails on his phone. He seemed oblivious to the undercurrent that now colored the air around Nova. Her gaze landed on a young black woman wearing a TSA uniform, standing near the gate, scanning the area with a professional detachment. Nova's mind replayed Celeste's words, something about a threat. She rose and approached the officer. "Excuse me," she said quietly, flashing a polite smile. "I overheard some talk about a threat on my previous flight. Do you know anything about that?" The officer's eyes flicked to her, recognition sparking. "Ms. Adeyemi," she said, her
Excuse
voice
me,
low.
officer. I have some
"We
urgent
received an
information
anonymous
regarding a
call about an
potential threat.
unspecific threat on Flight
Ma'am, what is this
837.
about?
It's being investigated. There's no need for alarm, but we're taking precautions." Her gaze softened. "If you have any concerns, please let us know. We've got eyes on you." Nova nodded, both reassured and unsettled. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate it." She returned to her seat, mind whirring. Anonymous call. Unspecific threat.
We got
Precautions.
eyes on you.
Her knee bounced. She stilled it with her palm. She had faced investors threatening to pull funding, competitors trying to sabotage code,
Anonymous call.
government officials questioning her loyalties.
Unspecific
But
threat.
this was new. This was physical, immediate. It made her acutely aware of her mortality. It made every microaggression and macro challenge she'd faced feel like part of a larger tapestry of resistance and resilience. She opened her notebook to a blank page. She pressed the pen to paper, allowing the ink to flow. Words poured out, not premeditated but raw. Airports are liminal spaces, thresholds between past and future, between here and there. Today, the liminality extends inward. I am between who I was before this morning and who I will be after. Danger heightens clarity. I see with new eyes the thin line between visibility and vulnerability. And I see the people who stand on that line with me. Celeste, Simone, Gerald, the TSA officer. I see my father soldering wires, bridging circuits, bridging worlds. I am a bridge. Bridges stand between shores, holding weight, flexing, sometimes swaying under storms, but refusing to break. I will not break. She stopped, her hand aching. She underlined, "I will not break." She tapped the page once, a silent punctuation. Her breathing slowed. "That looks serious," Gerald remarked lightly, peering at her notebook. "Just notes," she replied, closing it. "For my keynote. Stories make better bridges than statistics." He
That
nodded
looks
thoughtfully.
serious.
"True. People remember stories. Do you have any interesting stories?" she
Just
asked,
notes for my
surprised by her
keynote.
own interest. Perhaps distraction was what she needed. Or
About
perhaps
my
understanding him would give her insight into the types of people who could ally with her, the ones with power who still needed perspective. Gerald chuckled. "Depends on what you find interesting. I grew up in Iowa, cornfields, high
you have
school
any
football, the
interesting
whole
stories?
cliche. I worked my way through community college, then transferred to Columbia. I interned at a bank, got a taste for numbers, and never left. I've made a lot of
Depends
money
on
moving other people's
what
money
you find
around."
interesting.
"And your daughter wants to code," Nova observed. "Yeah." Pride blossomed on his face. "She's brilliant. She built a website for our local animal shelter when she was 12. I think she likes that her brain can build things you can't see. She gets that from her mom. Emily's mom was a sculptor. She passed away when Emily was 6. Cancer. I haven't
She
always
is
known how to
truly
parent a teenage girl alone."
Brilliant young
His
woman.
eyes misted slightly, and he blinked.
She
"You'd
was a
think
sculptor.
negotiating multi-million-dollar
With
deals would
hands
prepare
that
me for
could
negotiations
find
over
beauty in
makeup and
anything.
curfews. You'd be wrong." Nova's chest softened. "Life's hardest
Been hard
negotiations are
trying to
always
raise a
personal,"
teenage
she
girl
said.
on my own.
"Tell me about it," he replied, smiling weakly. "What about you? Where did you grow up?" His question was tentative, respectful. Lagos, Nigeria, she answered. The word tasted like home and the ocean,
Sometimes
like humid
the
nights
hardest
and bustling
conversations
markets.
are the ones that save us.
We moved to the States when I was
Thank
16.
you.
My father was an engineer. He built radios out of scrap metal and taught me that connectivity is a human right.
Lagos.
He died when I was 21. A building collapsed because of shoddy materials and corrupt officials. That's when I decided to build something that would outlive us both. Her voice remained steady, the details pared down to their essence. She didn't mention the grief that had carved hollows in her teenage years. The nights she lay awake listening to the static of the radio and wishing to hear her father's laugh. She didn't mention the way the city's frenetic heartbeat still echoed in her bones, the way she missed plantain frying in oil and the call of muezzin and church bells intermingling. Gerald listened, his expression contemplative. "And you did," he said. "You're changing the world. For the better, I hope," Nova said quietly. "But change always triggers pushback, hence threats." He flinched. "I guess that's why you asked the TSA officer. Do you think the threat was meant for you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I'd be arrogant to assume everything's about me,
I hope,
but I'd be naive to think I'm immune." He nodded,
Change
understanding smoothing his
always triggers
features.
pushback.
"Well," he said, leaning back, "let me know if you need me to punch somewhere."
I
She laughed, the sound surprising her.
Was that threat
"I'll
meant
keep
for
that
you?
in mind," she said. The tension eased a notch.
It's
An
easy
hour
to
passed
assume
in a slow
everything
drip of
revolves
minutes.
around you.
The gate filled with more passengers,
naive to think
a
you're
cross-section
immune
of
to its
humanity, a group of Japanese businessmen,
do I need to punch
their
for
suits
you?
impeccable, a family with 3 small children playing a game with a deck of cards, a tall man with dreadlocks reading a thick paperback, an elderly couple sharing earbuds and whispering to each other. The background noise of the terminal became a constant hum that wrapped around Nova like a blanket. A figure approached from the
Thank you for
concourse,
coming.
cutting a path through the crowd. He wore a dark suit and moved with deliberate
course.
ease. His eyes searched the room until they landed on Nova. He smiled, professional, reassuring, and walked directly to her. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said quietly, showing a badge. "I'm David, head of your private security team. Simone sent us. We'll be shadowing you discreetly. We've already swept the area. No immediate threats." Nova felt a wave of relief. "Thank you," she said. "This is Gerald Rogers, a fellow passenger. Gerald,
I
this
read
is
the
David."
agency.
David inclined his head, his gaze flicking over Gerald briefly, assessing. "Mr. Rogers," he said. "Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you," Gerald replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but lacked the dominance he might have projected in another context. The presence of security seemed to remind him of vulnerabilities he could not talk his way out of. "We'll sit over there," David said, pointing to 2 chairs several rows away. "If anything seems off, please signal us." He tapped his ear, indicating an earpiece. "We're listening." Nova nodded. As David and another agent took their positions, she felt an odd mix of comfort and constriction. Her independence had always been part of her identity. Accepting protection felt
We are
like
in
admitting she
position.
needed help, a truth she had avoided. But she reminded herself that strength included knowing when to rely on others. The intercom crackled. "Attention passengers," a voice said. "We apologize for the delay. Flight 8573 will begin boarding in 30 minutes. Please have your boarding passes ready. We will begin with families with small children and our first-class passengers." 30 minutes. Nova's stomach clenched. Across from her, Gerald closed his eyes briefly,
Ladies and
perhaps
gentlemen,
uttering a
this is the
silent
final
prayer.
boarding call for
Nova
flight
wondered if he prayed,
BA249 to
if he asked for
London Heathrow.
forgiveness, for patience, for his daughter to find her way. She wondered
We
if his
would like
apology to her
invite
had
our
been step
first-class
one on a longer
passengers
journey
to
of
begin
unlearning.
boarding.
She hoped so, for his sake and Emily's. Nova stared at the digital clock above the gate. The red numbers shifted with each passing second. Celeste's warning echoed. The anonymous message throbbed at the edges of her consciousness. The hum of the terminal fused with the thump of her heartbeat. She pictured her father again, twisting wires together to form a circuit, 2 points connected by a loop. Energy flows only when the circuit is closed. Her life was a series of circuits, Lagos to New York, injustice to
Watch your
innovation,
back.
vulnerability to strength. She needed to complete this one, to Tokyo, to the stage, to the message she carried. She glanced at her watch. 29 minutes until boarding. She tapped the notebook with her pen, the sharp click grounding her. She reopened to a new page, wrote at the top, Chapter 2, Between Flights. Beneath it, she scribbled, "The stories we tell ourselves in liminal spaces shape the bridges we build." The weight of that truth settled into her bones. The next flight would not just be a physical journey. It would be the continuation of her saga, a path through turbulence that was both atmospheric and human. She took a deep breath, held it, and slowly released. The next chapter awaited. What What boundaries existed between perseverance and recklessness? And could she recognize them when crossing might mean saving lives or risking them? Nova gripped the boarding pass for Flight 8573 with fingers that were steady only because she forced them to be. The gate attendant scanned it and waved her through, her mouth moving in a practice script. "Welcome aboard." The words slipped past Nova like water over stone. She nodded, offering a polite smile, then stepped onto the jet bridge once more, the metal walkway reverberating faintly with footsteps and the low hum of the plane waiting at the end. The late afternoon light filtered through the narrow windows, slicing thin bands across the floor,
Welcome
illuminating dust motes suspended like thoughts. Nova's shadow fell elongated and wavering. Behind her, Gerald followed, shoulders slightly hunched, his phone pressed to his ear as he updated his assistant. He had insisted on boarding after the families and those requiring assistance, despite being first class, saying he needed to stretch and avoid the chaos. His gestures had softened since their earlier confrontation. Ahead of Nova, a mother wearing a hijab shepherded two children, her hands constantly adjusting their backpacks and hoodies, murmuring to them in a gentle but firm tone. Nova stepped through the aircraft door, past the smiling flight attendant whose eyes darted to her face, recognition flaring. "Ms. Adeyemi," the attendant whispered, inclining her head. "We're honored to have you." "Thank you," Nova replied, her voice softening. The subtle acknowledgement felt like a blessing, a momentary reprieve from the previous hour's tension. She turned to her left, into the first-class cabin, its layout similar to the one from earlier, but now suffused with the golden glow of the lowering sun. The seats were wider, the privacy partitions higher. She made her way to 1A, the only window seat in the first row, this time unoccupied. Her bag slid easily beneath the ottoman-like space in front of the seat, her notebook nestled within easy reach. She sat and closed her eyes briefly. The headrest cushioned her, the leather smelling faintly of citrus from whatever cleaning solution had been sprayed. The hum of the plane's systems was a bass note that resonated in her bones. She exhaled slowly, feeling tension melt from her shoulders. Moments later, Gerald took the seat across the aisle, nodding. "You too," she responded. She watched passengers file in, scanning their faces out of habit now, noting their moods and ages, creating quick sketches of who they might be. An elderly man with a shock of white hair and deep-set eyes, his hands shaking slightly as he placed a violin case in the overhead bin. A woman in a tailored red suit, her short afro perfectly shaped, her eyes flicking to Nova then away. A tall teen with earphones around his neck, his t-shirt reading, "Hack the Planet," who kept glancing at the seat numbers as if hoping for something better. A few rows back, she spotted Celeste, her cobalt jumpsuit now partially covered by a gray cardigan. Celeste caught her eye, lifted two fingers to her brow in a salute, and winked. Nova smiled. The presence of someone who had offered both admiration and a warning soothed her. David and his team boarded discreetly, taking seats in the last row of first class and scattered through economy, blending in with their nondescript clothing and neutral expressions. David caught Nova's gaze and gave the slightest nod before looking away. Nova's watch read 1058 p.m. Nova's watch read 1058 p.m. She allowed herself to imagine the arc of the journey. Takeoff, leveling off, a long stretch of hours suspended between continents and time zones, descending through clouds into Tokyo's neon embrace. She visualized her speech at the summit, the words shaping themselves into a narrative about bridges and circuits, about occupying spaces that were not designed with people like her in mind and redesigning them. She would speak of connectivity, not just in the technological sense, but in the human. She would talk about the seat she fought for and how seats at tables, on boards, and classrooms mattered. The safety video played on the seat screen, animations of cartoon people pulling oxygen masks over their noses, fastening seatbelts, inflating life vests. Nova watched, this time tuning in to details she usually ignored. The simple instructions felt like a ritual, a litany of preparation that offered comfort through familiarity. She traced the path of light along the floor in her mind, noting where the exits were. Under her breath, she rehearsed the mantra she had learned from her father and adapted. "Stay rooted, stay aware, stay alive." The plane taxied, the engine's pitch rising. Nova's heart beat in time with the roll of the wheels over the tarmac seams. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Gerald remove a small leather-bound book from his bag and open to a page filled with printed text and margins scribbled with notes. His fingers traced a sentence. She smiled inwardly, appreciating that even finance men annotated. As the plane lined up on the runway, Nova glanced at the cabin door. A tall man with slicked back hair and aviator sunglasses stood in the aisle, placing a small duffel bag into the overhead bin. He glanced around casually, then took his seat in 2C, one row behind Nova on the aisle. He wore a navy windbreaker and jeans, nondescript except for a small embroidered logo on his sleeve, an angular symbol she didn't recognize. He seemed younger than she was, his jaw clean-shaven, his fingers long and slender. He put on headphones, closed his eyes, and leaned back. Something about the rhythm of his movements lodged in Nova's mind. The engines roared, pressing her against her seat. She felt the familiar G-force as the plane accelerated, the runway blurring, the nose lifting. The buildings outside the window tilted, then dropped away, replaced by a patchwork of smaller rectangles and lines, roads and fields, parking lots and roofs. The plane climbed into the clouds, a gray-white world that enveloped them briefly, then broke into an expanse of blue. Nova's hand unconsciously sought the armrest. It met Gerald's across the aisle. They exchanged a glance, both hands retreating as if caught reaching for candy in a store. He chuckled nervously. "Old habits," he murmured. Once the plane leveled off, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Flight attendants rose from their jump seats, beginning their choreography of checks and service. Nova unbuckled her belt but remained seated. She pulled out her notebook and pen, flipping to a clean page. Her mind was a swirl of the morning's events, the warnings, the subtle interactions. She wanted to record them, to make sense of them through words. She wrote, "Air travel as a metaphor for progress. Lift requires resistance. Forward motion requires leaving solid ground. Turbulence is inevitable. How do we ensure we land safely with our humanity intact?" Her pen scratched quietly on the paper. "Excuse me, Miss Adeyemi," a voice said softly. Nova looked up to see a woman standing in the aisle, her expression polite yet determined. She wore a simple black blouse and jeans, a press badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Her light brown skin held a dusting of freckles across her nose. Her eyes were inquisitive, a spark of both excitement and caution. "My name is Jasmine Ellis. I'm a journalist with Vanguard Media. I'm on my way to cover the summit. Would you mind answering a few questions at some point during the flight? Off the record if you prefer. It's just this morning's events, the seat incident, the grounding. People are talking. There's speculation." Nova regarded her, noting the sincerity in her gaze. She normally avoided unscheduled interviews, preferring to prepare, control the narrative. But the presence of a journalist who had witnessed at least part of her day could be an opportunity, either to share her perspective or to protect herself from misinterpretation. "Speculation about what?" she asked cautiously. Jasmine lowered her voice, leaning slightly into the space between them. And of course, social media is buzzing about the seat confrontation, with some calling it a manufactured publicity stunt. I wanted to give you a chance to respond. Nova's stomach clenched. The idea that someone would think she staged that moment for publicity turned her anger sharp. "Manufactured," she repeated, unable to keep the incredulity from her voice. Jasmine held up her hands. "I don't believe that," she said quickly. "But narratives take on lives of their own. As a reporter, I try to get quotes from primary sources rather than chasing rumors. Also, if there is a credible threat against you, that's a public safety concern. People will want to know if the airline handled it properly." Nova weighed her options. She could shut down, refuse to engage. Or she could speak, perhaps shaping the narrative toward truth. She also recognized the chance to deliver a message about microaggressions and systemic bias, about how a seat dispute could become emblematic of larger issues. She glanced at David 2 rows back. He was watching, his face impassive. He made a slight hand gesture, thumb up, index finger pointing to her, then tapping his ear. It was their signal. If she chose to speak, they would listen and intervene if necessary. "All right," Nova said, "but off the record for now. I'll let you know if you can attribute anything." Jasmine nodded enthusiastically. "Of course," she said, pulling a small recorder from her pocket and turning it off before setting it on the armrest as a gesture of good faith. She instead took out a tiny notebook, ready to jot notes. "Can you walk me through this morning? In your own words." Nova inhaled slowly, choosing her words.
My seat was occupied.
"I arrived at the airport like any other traveler," she began. "My boarding pass had me in 2A. When I reached my seat, another passenger was sitting there. I asked him to move. He refused. The flight attendant confirmed my seat assignment. He moved after a brief discussion. Shortly after, the pilot announced a mechanical issue. The plane returned to the gate, and the flight was canceled. That is, to my knowledge, what happened. But there was no altercation beyond the discussion? Jasmine pressed gently. No, Nova said. I did not raise my voice. He did not raise his voice. There were tense emotions, but no one was violent. And the mechanical issue? Jasmine asked. Have you been told anything more? I have heard rumors, Nova said carefully, glancing at Jasmine's poised pen. I cannot confirm them. It is for the airline and relevant authorities to investigate. However, I will say this. It would be unfortunate if a false threat was called in because someone felt entitled to a seat that wasn't theirs, just as it would be dangerous if a real threat was disregarded because people assume black women overreact.
Have you felt unsafe
Both scenarios
before?
speak to systemic issues. Jasmine's hand froze briefly. Then she scribbled quickly.
Don't trust anyone.
That's a powerful statement, she murmured. Do you think the seat incident is receiving more attention because of your status? It's receiving attention because we
Don't
live in a
trust
society
anyone.
that still questions whether black people belong in certain spaces,
If you
Nova
think
said,
intimidation
feeling heat
will
under her
silence
skin.
me,
When I
you
claimed
will
my
be
seat, I wasn't just
disappointed.
claiming upholstery and a window. I was claiming my right to exist where I'd been assigned. For some, that's seen as an affront. No! And now, Jasmine said, lowering her voice again. There are whispers that your company's success has put you in the crosshairs of competitors who might go as far as sabotage. Have you felt unsafe before? Nova hesitated. She thought of the email and the message on the shuttle. She thought of Celeste's warning. Anyone who pushes against established power structures is at risk, she said finally. That's why I invest in security and community. Not because I intend to live in fear, but because I refuse to be silenced by intimidation. If there are people who think this morning's events will discourage me from speaking truth to power, they will be disappointed. Jasmine's eyes gleamed, admiration flickering with her journalistic hunger. May I ask? A sudden jolt cut her off. The plane dipped sharply, then righted itself. A few passengers gasped. Nova grabbed the armrests, her notebook tumbling to the floor. Jasmine staggered, steadying herself against the seat. Folks, we've hit a patch of rough air. The pilot's voice came over the speakers, calm but brisk. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please be seated. Turbulence. Nova's breath caught. She fumbled for her seatbelt, the metal end cold against her fingers. The belt clicked into place. Jasmine slid into the empty seat beside her and secured her own belt. Gerald across the aisle had already buckled his knuckles white around his book. Celeste looked up from her seat, brow furrowed but body relaxed, her head resting against the headrest.
Seatbelt sign is
The
on.
plane shuddered again. A vertical drop that elicited a chorus of nervous laughter and stifled screams. The cabin lights flickered. Nova's pulse pounded in her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut, focusing on the in and out of her breath. Rooted yet unbound, she thought, gripping the mantra as if it were a rope tethering her to sanity. She opened her eyes. Through the tiny oval window, the clouds whipped past in haphazard currents, patches of blue peeking through like glimpses of
please sit
calm.
down.
Beside her, Jasmine's fingers dug into the armrest. I hate turbulence, she admitted, voice tight. It will pass, Nova said, surprising herself with the calm that laced her words. It always does. As if in response, the plane lurched again, more violently this time. A metallic clanging sounded from overhead. Nova's mouth went dry. The seatback screen in front of her jumped to a safety message. Fasten seatbelt. Return to seat. In the row behind her, the man with the duffel bag and the navy windbreaker stirred. His eyes opened. He looked around, his gaze sweeping the cabin. His jaw tightened. He unclasped his seatbelt. Nova's muscles tightened. Sir, she said, raising her voice a notch, the seatbelt sign is on. He glanced at her, a brief acknowledgement, then stood, gripping the seat back. His hand reached for the overhead compartment, fingers curling around the handle of his duffel. The plane jolted, throwing him sideways. His other hand darted out, steadying him. The duffel swung, its contents shifting with a thump. Sir, please sit down, a flight attendant called from 2 rows back, voice strained. The man ignored her. His face remained neutral, almost blank, but his movements were deliberate. He pulled the duffel down, sliding it onto his seat. Nova's stomach plummeted. Every news story she had ever read about attempted attacks on planes flashed in her mind. Her hand reached instinctively for the call button above her. David's head whipped around. He unbuckled, half rising from his seat, his eyes locked on the man. Nova heard a click as another agent behind the man unclasped his own belt. The turbulence continued, but every mind in their vicinity focused on the duffel.
Sir, you need to remain
What are you
seated.
doing? Gerald shouted, his voice high-pitched with fear and authority. The man's eyes flicked to Gerald, then to Nova. They were a
Sir, you
startling
need to
shade of
remain
pale
seated.
gray, almost colorless. He set the duffel on his lap. His fingers moved swiftly on the zipper. Nova's breath caught in her throat. Time slowed. She saw David's hand dip into his jacket, likely reaching for a badge or a weapon. She saw Jasmine's hand go to her mouth. She heard a baby cry somewhere further back. Then the man unzipped the bag fully. Inside were no wires, no explosives, no weapons. Instead, he pulled out a small metal case the size of a lunchbox and a plastic bag containing what looked like a model airplane. He glanced at them, the corners of his lips turning up. It's my insulin, he said loudly, annoyance coloring his tone. I need to take a dose before turbulence makes it impossible.
We were right.
A collective
to be
exhale
concerned.
rippled through the cabin.
Second.
The flight attendant sighed, shoulders sagging. She walked over, still gripping the seat backs for balance. Sir, next time please
Are you
ring the
okay?
call light, she said,
Yes.
voice chastened but firm. We could have assisted you. Apologies, he replied curtly, injecting himself quickly. He placed the items back into the duffel and zipped it. He sat, fastening his seatbelt this time. Nova released the breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She flexed her fingers. The turbulence eased, then settled into mild bumps. The plane's nose lifted slightly, climbing above the rough air. The seatbelt sign remained on. David locked eyes with Nova, offering a small, rueful smile that said, "We can't assume everything." She nodded, half in agreement, half in acknowledgement that fear had a way of making every motion suspect. Still, she couldn't shake the awareness that being on edge might have saved her if the situation had been different.
But the
Are you
challenge
okay?
now is to
Jasmine
learn from
whispered.
it,
Nova
without
nodded.
letting fear
Yes,
take
she
control.
said, though the adrenaline in her veins disagreed.
I will.
She picked up her notebook from the floor, brushing imaginary dust off the pages. She flipped to a fresh
will.
page and wrote, "Turbulence reveals two truths,
I
the
will.
fragility of our bodies and the resilience of our spirits. Suspicion can be protective or prejudicial.
will.
Knowing the difference is a life skill." She underlined, knowing the difference, twice. Gerald blew out a long breath. I thought. He
Here
trailed
is
off,
your
shaking his
vegetarian
head.
pasta.
Never mind, I thought wrong. We all did, Nova said quietly. Sometimes our fears are justified. Sometimes they misfire. The challenge is learning which is which without letting fear control us. Jasmine scribbled furiously. "That's going into the piece," she murmured.
stomach
"You
is
say it
in
off the
knots."
record," Nova reminded her,
Okay,
but her
let's
tone
try
held
a
no
breathing
bite.
exercise.
"I did," Jasmine agreed, smiling. "But wisdom is wisdom. I'll paraphrase. You better," Nova said with mock sternness. They both laughed softly,
work for
tension
boardroom
melting a
jitters,
little
too?
further. The flight
It
attendants
helps with
resumed their duties
living.
once the turbulence diminished. They distributed meals on trays, a choice of chicken teriyaki or vegetarian pasta. Nova chose the pasta, the smell of herbs and tomatoes grounding her. Eating was a practical act, a sign that life continued. She lifted her fork and took a bite. The flavors were bland, but the act of chewing brought her body back into itself. Gerald slid his book into the seat pocket. "My stomach's in knots," he confided. "Even pasta can't untangle it." "Try focusing on your breathing," Nova suggested. "In for 4 counts, out for 6. He did. "Does this help with boardroom jitters too?" he asked after a moment, his tone lighter. "It helps with living," she answered. Hours slipped by in a rhythm of reading, writing, and occasionally dozing. Nova
me
alternated between
updated.
staring out the window at the endless blue and white and scrawling thoughts in her notebook. Jasmine eventually returned to her seat 2 rows back. Gerald dozed, his head tilted, mouth slightly open. Celeste took out knitting needles and yarn, her hands moving with fluid grace, the click-click of metal soothing. At one point, Nova's phone lit up with a notification. "Simone, security team at Tokyo Aware. We'll meet you at arrivals. David has confirmed threat investigation ongoing. Keep me updated." Nova typed back. "Understood. On plane. Minor turbulence. Unrelated." She hesitated, then added, "Tell Legos team I will call after landing. Delay may inspire more content." She put her phone away, closing her eyes. She allowed herself to drift, not into sleep, but into memory. She was 7 again, standing on a balcony in Legos, watching her father string an antenna from their roof to the neighbors. He had looked at her, sweat beading on his brow, and said, "Transmission only works when the receiver is tuned to the right frequency. The world will send noise. Learn to distinguish the signal. That's how you build
Ladies
something
and
that
gentlemen,
lasts." She
this
thought
is
of the
your
noise of
captain
this
speaking.
day, entitlement, fear, rumors, threats. She thought of the signals, Celeste's warning, Gerald's apology, Jasmine's questions, the security team's vigilance. She thought of the need to tune her own receiver to truth and compassion. She would not let noise drown out signal. She drifted back to the present when the pilot's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent into Tokyo in approximately 30 minutes. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright and your seatbelts fastened. Local time is 5045 p. Temperature is a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius. We hope you enjoyed your flight." The cabin buzzed with renewed energy. Passengers stretched, gathered belongings, smoothed hair, applied lip balm. The city lights would soon appear below like constellations mirroring the ones above. Nova's heart quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. She was almost there. She had survived turbulence of multiple kinds.
You were
She
right
had
about
confronted
fear,
conflict, both
about
expected
seats,
and not.
and about stories.
The path ahead was still full of unknowns, but she
what?
could see the outline of land through breaks in the clouds, a promise of solid ground. She glanced at Gerald. He looked back, his eyes clearer now.
For not giving up
You
your
were right,
seat.
he said quietly, about fear,
For making
about
me think.
seats, and about stories. Thank you. For what? She asked. For not giving up your seat, he said simply. For making me think. For being human in a world that tries to turn us into brands. Nova absorbed his
Thank you for
words,
listening.
feeling their weight settle gently
This
on her.
is where change
Thank you for
truly
listening,
begins.
she said. Change starts with listening. As the plane descended, the city emerged, a sea of lights, blinking and steady, organized and chaotic, roads snaking like illuminated veins. Nova pressed her forehead against the window, the cool glass grounding her. Her reflection stared back, eyes bright, face resolute. She thought again of bridges, of circuits, of seats and stages. She had a keynote to deliver. She had a story to tell. It would include a seat dispute and turbulence and warnings and apologies and laughter and fear. It would include the truth that progress is messy and full of imperfect people, trying, stumbling, apologizing, and trying again. The wheels touched down with a gentle screech. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the gate. An applause erupted spontaneously from the back of the cabin, rippling
Welcome to
forward.
Tokyo,
Nova
where the
laughed,
local
adding her
time
own
is
2
now
claps.
3 p.m.
The flight attendant smiled, their relief evident. Welcome to Tokyo, the intercom announced. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign is turned off. Nova's phone buzzed again. David, we land safely. Debrief soon. Another from Simone. You're trending, by the way. Seat at the table. We'll handle. Focus on keynote. We've got your back. Nova smiled. A hashtag. Of course. The world always watching, always narrating. She would lean into it. She would use the attention to amplify, not to amplify herself, but the message. She would speak about seats on planes, at tables, in boardrooms, and about who gets to occupy them. She would call for everyone to examine their entitlement and their fear. She would challenge not just those who tried to take what wasn't theirs, but those who relinquished what was theirs too easily. The plane came to a stop. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers rose, stretching, reaching for bags. The aisle filled with bodies, everyone eager to disembark. Nova remained seated, waiting for the initial rush to pass. Gerald stood, retrieving his suitcase. Good luck, he said again. See you out there. You too, she replied, meaning it. She watched him go, watched Celeste stand and sling her tote over her shoulder, her finished knitted piece folded neatly. Jasmine gathered her reporter's bag, giving Nova a small salute. David and his team stood, scanning, ready to flank her. When she finally stood, her legs
We all
tingled from
watched you.
hours of sitting. She slung her bag
You're
over
so
her shoulder,
graceful.
grasped her notebook like a talisman, and stepped into the aisle. She moved forward, each step measured, her body humming with the energy of landing. At the door, the flight attendant who had greeted her smiled warmly. You handled everything with grace, she whispered. We were all watching. Nova nodded. Thank you, she murmured. Safe travels. The jet bridge led into a new terminal, bright and sleek, signs in Japanese and English guiding
are ready,
passengers
my
to
daughter.
customs and connections. The air smelled of clean floors and subtle spices from nearby restaurants. Voices spoke in languages she understood, and some she didn't. Tokyo enveloped her like a vibrant, pulsing entity. She inhaled deeply, the scents and sounds settling in her lungs. A new chapter unfurled before her, rich with possibility and challenge. As she stepped into the terminal, surrounded by strangers and security and new allies, she heard her father's voice again, a whisper layered over the airport announcements. Tune to the right frequency, Nova. Build bridges. Complete the circuit. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her scarf, and walked forward,